somebody who's learning the glass, one of the biggest things is just controlling the movement of the binoculars. I would say that for me personally, when I became, once I became hyper anal about, controlling the movement of my binoculars, either with a tripod or, just always framing, leaning against something, like if I'm going to glass out of a truck, even if I stop for just a minute, unless if I'm glassing like just looking at something 150 yards off the road, like, yeah, I'll leave my truck running. But if I'm looking beyond that, even if it's just for a quick look, like I turn the engine off of my truck. You know what I mean? Because the vibration makes it harder for you to see game.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. A hot drink can become cool in two primary ways, through conduction and convection. Conduction occurs when two objects touch each other. Imagine holding a piece of ice. Before long, your fingers are cold and the ice begins to melt. That's conduction. Convection occurs when a gas or liquid moves from being different temperatures. When you heat water over a stove, the warm water moves up and the cool water moves down. That's what you're seeing when water boils, and that's convection. A stainless vacuum bottle prevents conduction from occurring by creating a void between the walls of the bottle, thermos, or cup and the outside air. It prevents convection by keeping all the liquid inside at the same temperature. That's how a Stanley product keeps your cold drink cold and your hot drink hot. And they've been doing it for 110 years. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Stanley 1913, and you can check out their new and classic line of products at stanley1913.com. Well, good morning, sir. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. How are your holidays?
They were good, man. I actually spent them down here in the Caribbean. I've got a brother who lives down here, so I'm in Puerto Rico. We've had a good time. It's nice to be warm in the winter for once, How about you, James? How about yours?
Oh, good, man. It was good. I rolled my truck on Christmas Eve. We had some pretty icy conditions up here. We actually had some pack ice and some black ice on the road, and then we got freezing rain on top of that. And I slid off the road going like 15 miles an hour and went off a bank and rolled my truck and ended up upside down. And there's a couple interesting lessons from that. One is that I wear hunting gear all year long. Like I never stop doing it because it's the clothes that I own and I'm outside a lot, right? I'm not trying to like front that I'm wearing camouflage or something while I'm eating biscuits and gravy in town in February. It's the stuff that I own.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me about this whole deal is I rolled into the snow, and the side airbags went off in this F-150, which was awesome. Like, what cool technology. Like, that truck turned into like a kid's bouncy gym as soon as the wreck started to happen. And I didn't get hurt at all. I had a rifle in the back, and I shot it a few days later. It was still zeroed, right? So
good deal.
Like, this truck really did a good job of protecting me and the stuff that was inside of it. But with those side airbags upside down, I would not have been able to get out of the truck if I didn't have a knife to be able to cut through those airbags. So I had my normal Argali carbon hunting knife around my neck. So I was able to cut out my airbags to get out of the truck. So that was handy. And then I was wearing all my good Kryptek hunting gear. So as soon as I got outside in the snow, I'm fine. It's not a big deal for me to hang out. And I talked to another guy who had wrecked that same day in Montana, and he was not wearing gear, and he got frostbite. And he wrecked in town. He was just waiting outside, and it was too cold, and he ended up getting frostbite. So I always tell people to dress for the wreck. When you're flying places, I like to wear the kind of stuff that I would generally want to have on if the plane crashed, whether that's especially if it's a small plane. But I think that it's just smart. And then I had my first aid kit and my decked system, and I always wondered if I wrecked a truck, if that decked box would go flying out of the bed, and
Yeah.
it did not. So had I needed that, all I needed to do was open the tailgate, and even though we were upside down, the decked box still worked, the drawers still slid out, so I could have gotten to my first aid kit and all my safety stuff there. So there's a lot of things that I feel pretty good about.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good, man. And I like what you just said. It's so easy to forget that, right? I think it's so easy to forget that. I think it's because we have all this technology around us all the time. How little weaklings us humans are without like our equipment. You know what I mean?
For
So if you're
sure.
you're you're driving down, even though it's -20 outside or whatever it was, James, you're driving in your truck, you have no worry that you're wearing your pajamas or whatever until you're in a wreck. No, I can only imagine, man. It doesn't take much unpreparedness to get yourself in pretty big trouble if you're not thinking about it. But man, you said that story, James, and immediately I felt so bad because I had just so your listeners know, I had you on a podcast like a few days back, and I didn't even ask you about it, and I had seen it on your Instagram, and I'm sorry, man. Like that makes me feel horrible, dude. Because I remember seeing it on your Instagram and being like, wow, like that. I mean, it was. Your pictures are pretty epic on there. The truck just on its flat, and it also looked like you took like a pretty good like run off of the road. Like it's a pretty good down draw, right? Dude, that makes me feel like such a boob, man. Not I didn't even ask you about that.
Oh no, not at all. And I'm perfectly fine. The gear that was inside the truck is largely okay, and I have insurance. So like what a privileged, I guess, existence I get to live, that one, I got to drive a truck that took care of me in a wreck. Like that's an incredible privilege in itself,
Sure.
and that I can afford that, and I can afford the insurance, even though it's legally required of me, but I could do that, and my insurance is going to take care of me. And in the next couple of weeks I'll go truck shopping and I'll get another truck and I'll move on, and it'll all be fine. And in the meantime, I get the support of like great friends and family. I probably had half a dozen people say, "Hey, I don't have any plans right now. Do you need a truck? Come borrow mine."
Yeah.
Um, like it's just a really well supported existence that I get to live, and I'm very grateful for it. Grateful for all that infrastructure, whether it's friends or insurance, or people that I've never met that designed this vehicle. That yeah, gosh, I mean, if that would have happened in like the 67 Ford that I grew up with, that didn't even have seat belts, would I have died? No, almost definitely not. But would I have been able to scrap up the Fritos that I was taking to a Christmas Eve party and make it there a little bit late? But with Fritos intact? No, certainly not. So
Yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. It's easy enough. And
Yeah.
I love stuff like that happens around the holidays, because no matter like no matter who you are, I think all of us still believe a little bit in Christmas miracles, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I remember in Afghanistan, I was out on a mission on Christmas Day, and we'd found an IED, and EOD, the explosive ordnance disposal dudes, came down to work on it. And this guy stepped on a secondary IED and it blew up, but they'd buried it too deep. And he went a long ways, 10 yards, 15 yards, something like that, flying through the air. Looked really bad. The dude
Sure.
landed on his feet, stuck the landing like an Olympic gymnast. And either the landing or the explosives had broken like one or both of his ankles or some feet or something like that. But he stuck the landing, and then immediately calls out over his radio, "Merry Christmas." And it was amazing. It was a Christmas miracle, and the guy's all right. So I do love stuff like that, and I don't think it probably has anything to do with the calendar date of the year, but we'll take it in any form.
Yeah, of course, man. Little luck on your side is never a bad thing, man.
What's What's Christmas like in Puerto Rico?
Good, man. So I've done it a couple times because I've got a brother down here. And man, there's a lot of Christmas spirit up in the States, but Puerto Ricans, they're, I mean, they like Christmas in Puerto Rico is not, I feel like in the States, Christmas is like the 20th of December through like the 1st, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of like somewhere in that window. In Puerto Rico, Christmas is like December 10th to like somewhere mid-January. You know what I mean? Like Christmas spirit's a big deal. And then they celebrate an additional holiday too, Three Kings. So that kind of comes afterwards. So it's kind of a prolonged celebration here. It's awesome, man. It's weird because I don't want to complain about the weather, James, but there is something weird for me because I've always been in an environment, growing up where Christmas was a winter holiday, right?
Yeah.
So snow, going out and cutting a tree, all that. To me, that's a big part of Christmas. So that, a little bit of that, I'm like, oh, I kind of miss doing that. Like this year, I think this year's the first year of my kid's life that we didn't go cut our own Christmas tree. So that's one side of it, but on the other side of it, it's a great place to celebrate Christmas, man. And I think the main thing, I don't know how you do it, but trying to be around family during Christmas is where it's at.
Totally. I totally agree. That's awesome, man. So gosh, this isn't all that normal of a subject for me, but how are you spending your time down there? Like, are you surfing? Are you going out and hunting iguanas? Like what does a hunting guy do in Puerto Rico in the wintertime?
Yeah, so it's funny you ask that because I get that question a lot, and I bet you're like this too, James. Like it doesn't really matter where you're at. You're not gonna have like a lack of things to do. It's more like you gotta figure out how to do them and still get your work done. I one thing I've been trying to do here is I have a bunch of footage from fall guiding, a bunch of videos I took in the mountains that I'm trying to edit for my YouTube channel. So a lot of what I'm doing is just what I would do anywhere else, man. Just
Yeah.
kind of home office in it, doing that work, trying to get up that learning curve. But so that's part of it. And then, yeah, it's funny because I was actually just a week ago, I was talking to a guide that used to work for me who's still doing a bunch of outfitting. And the ocean for me, it's like, I'm not, I've been exposed to it in a bunch in my life, but it's still like, I guess how I would put it is I can dance with the mountains and I feel comfortable. I know I'm not going to dominate the mountains, but I can do that dance. The ocean, I'm not quite comfortable in yet. So I view it as a challenge, man.
Yeah.
So I would say, I'm very much an amateur at it, but I've been doing a little spear fishing, and then doing the normal beach stuff with the kids, that sort of thing. I've got some connections here that are, Puerto Rican folks that are great water guys. So they're kind of introducing me to the ocean. So I'm doing some of that. And I'm going to try, I haven't done any of it yet, but I'm going to try to do maybe a couple videos on that are kind of out of the box on those adventures. The iguana thing. Have you ever done the iguana thing, James?
No, I haven't. We were developing some air rifle stuff with
Okay.
SIG a few years ago, and I was actually at SHOT Show at the SIG range day, and the gal that was doing the air rifle development, she came up and she's like, "Hey, I'm not sure, but would you be interested in doing an iguana hunt on Puerto Rico?" And I was like, I'm packed right now. Like, let's go.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't,
sure.
what are we still doing here? Shooting machine guns at the range. Like, let's go iguana hunting.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
never got to do it. My close friend, Mike Kimmel, Python Cowboy, he makes a lot of his living with
Oh,
that
sure.
in Florida. I would love to, man. That looks great to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fun. I mean, I've done it a few times. And I'm for sure gonna bust out a couple. I have a video from I think maybe 2 years ago where I went on one, but it's not great footage. But I'll bust out a couple, Puerto Rico iguana hunts. They're fun, man. It's I guess what I would say is like super target rich environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, when you get in the areas where, they're basically, they're a real problem to any of the ag down here, and there's like an infestation. And it's just like the like Western hunting, right? Where, you know, if a guy has been out glassing for mule deer for the last 3 weeks, he's going to see 20 mule deer before the guy next to him who just started sees it. That's how the
Right.
Puerto Ricans are here, man. The guys who hunt iguanas, like, you know, you go out with them and they're just like iguana, iguana, iguana. And it takes you a couple hours and then your brain gets tuned up. And then it's like, holy crap, man, there's iguanas everywhere, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, it's not unusual to go out and shoot, you know, 50 iguanas in a morning or something like that.
Yeah, I think developing that search image is really important for any kind of hunting. And once your brain knows what to look for and what distance to look for it at, then you're really a lot better off. And I know, are you from Colorado originally?
Yeah, so I was born right there in the mountains in Colorado,
Okay.
outside of Eagle.
So I've only hunted Colorado once, and it was an elk hunt a few years ago outside of Pagosa with, half of the states of, Michigan, Texas, and California all joining me there. But I was looking at really long distances, and I was hunting with a guy named Tim Butler, who is from the Northeast. And Tim had spent most of his life hunting really close range wooded stuff. And we were sitting at the top end of a meadow, glassing along, and I was looking a couple miles out across this drainage, looking into some parks and things like that. And Tim goes, "There's an elk." And it's like, gosh, how did this guy spot an elk before me? I can't believe this. And I'm looking really hard. And all right, Tim, talk me onto it. And he goes, 50 yards. It's like, 50 yards? Like, and he was looking to the aspens, like really tight aspens right next to us. And that's what his brain was really used to. I would have
Sure.
completely missed him, man. I was 2 miles off. So that was a really interesting telling, I guess, of like what your brain can get used to, because it wasn't in his wheelhouse really, even though he had hunted in the West before. It really wasn't in his wheelhouse to be looking at stuff that was that far away. Whereas like
Yeah.
that's the norm for me, is to look at something that is really as far away as I can clearly see with my optics, and then try and make a plan based around that.
Right. You know, glassing's funny, James, and not to like totally nerd out on the subject, but I actually think what happens, particularly if you've just been hunting like a certain species for a while, I think that in guides and clients, always there's always this dynamic where a client will be like, "How are you seeing them so quick?" And it's kind of hard to explain, because I think what happens is your brain starts to catch patterns that you can't really explain, or that you even know it's doing. You know what I mean? I actually think that that's the case. Like, yeah, you know, of course they get, you know, you realize that, okay, now I know what color I'm looking for. Like that's an obvious, outward thing that we're all going to pick up on. But I think there's other things, man. When you start seeing game, over and over and over a few week period in the same type of vegetation, I think your brain starts to, it kind of knows like where a hot spot is, and it'll kind of drag you into looking at that more, right? And it could be the vegetation, it could be the shadows there, something that makes it just like gamey. You know what I mean? So I don't know, that's a little woo woo, but I actually think that's a real thing.
Oh, I agree 100%. Another thing is that something that amateurs do is they look for, and I'm going to use elk as an example. They'll look for elk, and they'll try to find something that is an elk out there. Something that professionals do is, in their eyes, everything is an elk until proven otherwise. So
Yeah.
it's almost the opposite approach. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about a study in one of his books that was talking about who can determine whether someone is lying or not. And most of us are really, really bad about detecting dishonesty.
Okay.
And the reason that we are bad about detecting dishonesty is the only way to do it is to assume that people are being dishonest. If my assumption is that you're lying to me, then when you do, it's easy for me to catch it. But that's a
Yeah.
really difficult way to communicate and to live life. And there's no trust that's developed. So people are better off in society if they assume honesty, if they assume best intent, even though that means that they're going to miss the lie.
Yeah, I
Um,
got you.
so for me, I'm going to look at a hillside and everything out there is a coyote. Like there, every
Yeah,
bush, everything is a coyote until I can determine that it's not. And I can do that pretty quickly because I know what a coyote or part of a coyote should look like. Same thing with elk or all the things that I'm used to. But if you
yeah,
put me in Puerto Rico and say, find all the iguanas,
yeah,
nothing
yeah,
nothing looks like an iguana to me. I'm looking for iguanas. I'm not looking for things that are not iguanas, and just going through that process that much
yeah.
faster.
I got you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
The thing that you're talking about with like just knowing, being able to high grade the terrain and vegetation really quickly and be like, okay, these are the places that, there should be an animal. Now I'm going to be able to, think about that really quickly and move through it and then come back to that to see if anything has changed. I think that just comes with experience in the terrain.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other thing is guides can cheat a little bit too because they're always hunting the same stuff, right? So like, I mean, it's funny you mentioned the deal with your buddy glassing up the close elk. There were some spots, last few years in particular that I guided. These big, I'd get up above an aspen bench that was just a thick, kind of belly bench where you couldn't look into it anywhere. And I mean, I'm talking stuff like sub 300 yards, 250 yards. And I'd sit down with guys and I'd pick up game in there, but I'm talking like, just a little tine, or you'd see just like, just a little tail dock, that sort of thing. And it was, you'd always get like a flabbergasted reaction, but it's like I've literally glassed this spot like, 400 times.
Yeah.
And usually somewhere in there this time of day, there's game. So like in my mind, it's a lot, it's not a fair, it's not that glassing's a competition, but if it were, it's not a fair competition.
Yeah. You can treat a hillside and everything that's on it like your living room and the furniture that's in it. And it may seem like a hillside is something that's a lot more complex, and in some ways it is, but you can also memorize it so that
Yeah.
anything that changes on there stands out to you so obviously. It would be the same as you walking into your living room and the chair being in a different place. Like you would notice
Oh
that
yeah.
immediately because you've memorized what it should be. So as soon as there's a change, it's just glaringly obvious.
Yeah, man. It
Yeah.
it's the way you put it, James, is a good way because I've actually tried to explain that concept. And the way I explain it is like my kids, they play these games, and a lot of times they'll be on like diner menus or like kids menus, and it'll be like a picture, like a cartoon picture, and it'll be like pick the 5 things that are different in the other picture. And our brains are really good at that. And I do that when I'm glassing, like particularly a spot that I know well. Like, I mean, I can look at like there's certain spots where I can look at a ridge line and I can just without even glass and like look across that set of aspens and be like, there's a bull bedded right there. I see it. You know what I mean? Even before I pull up my binoculars. And that's because I've seen that stretch from that exact angle a million times. You know what I mean? But I like the way you explain it. It totally makes sense.
So as you're coming into a new environment, or if you're a new hunter, um, both being roughly the same thing, what's your advice to people to try to get to that level? They don't have the advantage of looking at this hillside 400 times over the last 10 years. So how are you instructing either a client who's sitting down with you or somebody who's listening to this show that's going to go out on their own? Like, how can they get a little bit of a leg up? How can they expedite this process so that they can spot game more quickly?
James, so I think part of it for better or worse is that it does just take time. And I have a whole theory about that too. It doesn't just take, time in the field. It also takes time where you really kind of analyze like what you're doing, and you go on one hunt and then hopefully you can go on another hunt in a couple of weeks, that sort of thing, kind of iterate on the process. So it just does take time and repetition, but being, critically thinking about that repetition. But beyond that, kind of what you're really asking for is like, what are some tips to get you like up their learning curve faster? And those do exist. For me, somebody who's learning the glass, one of the biggest things is just controlling the movement of the binoculars. I would say that for me personally, when I became, once I became hyper anal about, controlling the movement of my binoculars, either with a tripod or, just always framing, leaning against something, like if I'm going to glass out of a truck, even if I stop for just a minute, unless if I'm glassing like just looking at something 150 yards off the road, like, yeah, I'll leave my truck running. But if I'm looking beyond that, even if it's just for a quick look, like I turn the engine off of my truck. You know what I mean? Because the vibration makes it harder for you to see game.
Right.
And so just, that's it's a real practical thing people can do. If you become super conscientious about controlling that movement, you will start to see way more game. And I think there's lots of reasons why, but one of them for sure is that you'll start picking up the very small movements that game makes. You know what I mean? Just little ear flickers, a tail twitching, any of that stuff, cow chewing or cut or whatever. You're gonna pick that up. Whereas from any distance, if you have movement in your optic, it's hard. And you may know, you may have a little bit more, some more depth to this, because I've actually talked to some people and they say another reason that helps is that in the optic, if you have the movement, your eyes are like constantly trying to autofocus. So it actually wears your eyes out too. So if you can control that movement, you have less kind of fatigue over time also. So if I could tell a person who's glassing one thing, I would say that, like, you have to get your optic under control. That would be the biggest one. And then the other thing is what you hit on, James, and that's don't look for just the profile of a mule deer buck on the horizon, or a whole bull elk is going to be in the middle of a south facing slope during the middle of hunting season, one of these over the counter units. I mean, when I would see a mule deer or elk in that situation, it was so odd. I would be like shocked. You know what I mean? They just like, when they get hunted really hard, you're very rarely going to see the whole body of an animal. During shooting light, right? They're always on the edges. They always have some covered nearby, all that. So you've got to get used to seeing that. And you hit on something that's very important, and that's that if you see something, like the best example that I would use is, a lot of times I'll see curves that feel suspicious to me, right? Like I see a curve, between a couple trees or down low or whatever, and it may not look like an elk. It might not even have the color of an elk to me. Who knows? I'm actually colorblind, which really means I'm kind of just shade blind. So I'm not going to see the depth of color of most people do anyways. But I'll look at that curve, and I mean, I will like get the movement of my binocular to zero, and I'll just watch that curve for a second and just see if it moves a little bit, see if I can see hair. Like if you really focus on something, even from a long distance with good optics, it might take a second, but there's a difference between, bark and hair, just the texture. You'll notice it, and you'll be like, boom, yeah, that's an elk actually. Whereas you could have went over that 10 times and not been just meticulous about it, and you'd never pick up that animal. So I was going to say those are my quick tips, but that wasn't very quick. But
that wasn't very quick. However, if people listen to that like 100 times in a row and memorize everything that you just said and go out and implement it, they'll go from a 101 level hunter to a master level hunter that day. Like if you can figure out how to glass and utilize all the techniques that you just talked about, you're ahead of 99% of the competition. You just won out west. You beat everybody. If you can master glassing and wind, like the rest of it is so basic, it's almost not even, those are incredible tips. The way that I defeat movement is with image stabilized binoculars.
Yeah, and go for it, James, because I'll be honest with you, man. I want to hear about them because I'm super unfamiliar
Yeah.
with even how they work.
So I think I may have talked with you about this before, but I'm trying to move all of the technology that I used to have available in the Marine Corps into the hunting space. So the things that I used to have there, I want again. And one of those things is image stabilized binoculars. So what that means is there are going to be a couple gyroscopes that are inside the optic that stabilize the prism. So light comes in through the lenses, it hits a prism, goes through some more lenses, and then comes out into your eye so that you can see a magnified version of what is out there. The human eye is the eye of both a predator and a prey species. So as our species evolved, we hunted things and we were hunted by things. For both of those, what was really critical was our ability to see movement. That's how we pick stuff up, is not always on the color of something, not always on the shape of something, but by its movement. And some evidence indicating that color is relatively unimportant to us is by the amount of the light spectrum that we can see. So we can see from like violet to red. That's what we can see. Everything in between. Red, orange, green, yellow, indigo, blue, violet, I think is the way it goes. So most animals can see one side or the other of that. So some can see infrared a little bit, and then others can see ultraviolet, and it shifts what they can see, and we're firmly in the middle. But we see movement extraordinarily well, and we can see both at close range and at distance, and we can see during the crepuscular hours of dawn and dusk, which definitely is a weak point for a lot of species, whether they can see really well at night or during the day. Those shoulder periods are difficult. So our eyes can see, from really first light in the morning until last light in the evening, and we can see movement extremely well, and we can see basic colors that are in the middle. If your binoculars or your spotting scope are moving, then your eye has lost its predominant ability to detect movement, and now you are relegated to only seeing color or shape. And you can't see shape very well because, like you said, we're having trouble focusing. And then color isn't all that helpful because the animals that we're trying to see, the color that they are is a color that helps them avoid detection, right? And the
Right.
places that they're in is helping them avoid detection based on how shadows are falling on them and things like that. And they're limiting their movement. So being able to have a stable view of your animal, whether that's using traditional optics on a tripod or, trekking poles or lodgepole pine, or, however you figured out how to stabilize them, incredibly important. The image stabilized binoculars, I can hold those things up with one hand, 16 power binos that weigh 18 ounces. I've got a trekking pole dangling from my wrist. It should be impossible for me to see anything, but because that prism stabilizes what I can see, not only can I see really well, but I can detect movement. So my primary strength has come back to me through that technology. So there's a lot more clear optics out there than I'm talking about the SIG Zulu 6. That's this image stabilized bino. No doubt in the world, like Swarovski, Zeiss, Leica, and even some of the traditional optics that SIG makes, like the Zulu 9, definitely clearer than the Zulu 6. However, you will be able to outglass everybody if you have a stabilized platform to see through. And if you put like an eye chart up, I don't care if somebody spent $9 million on their Swaros, somebody with stabilized binos is going to be able to read a smaller font than the other guy. So that movement that you're talking about, 100% critical, and I am on board with you. I think that's very sage advice to figure out how to stabilize yourself, and spend time getting creative with that rather than waste time glassing from an unsupported position.
Yeah. No, I hear you. But man, I'll have to get a pair of those and try them, man. Are they available? I mean that
Sure.
model, it's available. Okay, I
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to try it. And it's interesting, James. I mean, I'm just naive to the technology. it's a mechanical stabilization. It's not software.
Right. So it's powered. So like they get run by one AA battery, and that'll take you through a whole hunting
Okay.
season. So the power bill is really low on them. Gyroscopes are amazing, and gyroscopic precession is really amazing too. So that's what keeps a bicycle moving. So a single tire is a gyroscope. As soon as you have two tires moving in the same direction, you have gyroscopic precession. And now a moving bike is incredibly easy to balance on, which is remarkable, right? That would seem like an impossibility if you're trying to explain that to someone who'd never seen a bicycle before.
Yeah.
Like, you would think that would be very difficult to control, not increasingly easy to control the faster it's going.
Yeah.
So like you spin a top on a table, you can push your finger into the thing and it will lean back against you. So that's what's happening to that prism, is as you're moving, it's sort of floating around in there and resisting that movement and providing a stable image. And yeah, it's pretty cool. One of the biggest surprises to me about it is that I could see really well at low light, and they're fairly small in their objectives. So what is it? Focal diameter. I can't remember all the technical terms, but basically the amount of light coming through was less than what you would get from, say, something with a 50 millimeter objective lens. But I was able to see deeper into the dark with stabilized binoculars than otherwise. And I think that just goes back to our eyes' necessity to have a stable image.
Yeah. That makes sense, man. And I've actually, I don't know if it's age or maybe it's who knows, experience, age, or whatever, but I've actually become more sensitive with my chest binocular to the weight of it. I've always carried range-finding binoculars when I was guiding in particular. Very handy, obviously, to just have it right there. But I have found recently, in the last like 18 months, I'll still use them because of the just utility of having that rangefinder there. But man, sometimes I do prefer to not have the rangefinder in there just because of the weight, and I can hold them steadier.
Yeah.
Even with the frame, I don't have that fatigue. So it does matter. But yeah, man, that's one that it's the thing that's crazy about it is every guide or hunter who's spent a whole lot of time in the field that I've hunted with, somewhere during their career as a hunter, they figure that out, because all the greats in my mind, they frame up or they use a tripod a lot or whatever when they're glassing. That's a good one for folks.
Who are some hunters who influenced you as you were growing up and developing within this?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I had you on Jay's podcast. Jay's been a pretty big influence on me in terms of, particularly in the last like 7 or 8, 10 years with glassing. Fairly humble guy, James. Like a lot of his content is really about bringing other people's knowledge to his listeners. But there's a ton I've learned just directly from him. He's super knowledgeable. So he's one. I think in terms of skill set, there's him. There's been guides and outfitters in Colorado that I helped on hunts or guided for, that nobody knows about, James. Like Joe Bauscher, I learned a lot from him. He's probably over the last 30, 40 years one of the most successful sheep guides probably in North America. But he doesn't have a profile on Instagram. That doesn't matter to him.
Yeah, those are the guys I want to hear about. So what's a good Joe Bauscher story?
Yeah, so the thing about him is when I went into an area sheep hunting with Joe, he always knew how to be kind of proficient at where he was going to glass from, right? And one of the things I learned from him is if we're gonna hike up a drainage for 4 or 5 hours, he's not going to glass every 400 yards, right? He already knows, the 3 or 4 spots that we're going to spend time glassing in that drainage, right? And one, it's just that his knowledge of the area over years of guiding in the same area, but also just this knowledge of, it always applies when you're hunting, but it applies even more so when you're guiding. There's always this management of, how much effort and energy there is in the hunt, right? If you stop with a 60-pound backpack, every 400 yards to glass, it drags on you and you're not being efficient, right? You got to go to the right spots in glass and spend your time there. And then you also need to be, looking in areas, and this applies to sheep to some extent, but on goats with him, when particularly I'd go scouting, it was always not about finding goats that were just there. Is about finding goats you could actually kill, right? So it's always about efficiency. And that's one thing about him I learned, and I think it actually improved my guiding in particular. You can't just go ad hoc at it, man. You got to have like spots you're going to and use your time hunting at those spots, if that makes sense.
How do you pick a spot to glass from?
So there's kind of 2 ways that I do, at least. One, just kind of like traded knowledge, right? Like all my glassing spots, all my glassing spots in the flat tops, like, amongst the guides, like we kind of just like traded them, right? And then we also kind of had spots that I guess in some ways, everybody knew, oh, that's a spot that Cliff likes to glass out of, or that's a spot that Evan likes to glass. So like we would kind of be, there's a little kind of code or whatever around that. But outside of that, you trade those spots, and over time, and those spots get traded. I think a lot of hunters do that. And that's from just, spending the time to go up there and hike. The other thing that I do if I'm going into a new area is I just use a topo map. You know what I mean, James? And I think that it's very easy for me to say, but it takes time, iterating, right? And you can do it on Onyx or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but turn the layer on. My recommendation to people is turn the topo layer on, and when you get into spots where you're like, oh man, I can really see a lot from here, look at that topo map and look at what it looks like right on the topo map. And then you got kind of that picture of it, zoom out in your map or scroll around a little bit and look at spots, that have the same exposure, sometimes depending on the area, like it's got to have the same vegetation too, because you can go into a slightly different exposure and the vegetation changes. And then all of a sudden it's very difficult to glass from there. You can't get as much of a view. But if you see an image on a topo map and you're there and you're like, this is good, where's another spot like that, right? I do that a lot. My other recommendation on glassing spots, particularly when you're just going out to find them, is you can't. I'm trying to say have a nice way to say this, man, but you can't be like a weenie about it, man. Like you can't go halfway up to glassing spots. I know that sounds naive, but or sounds obvious, but a lot of people do that, particularly in the dark. If they're in a new area, they're going to go halfway up. If you have a spot, on the top of the map, that looks like a good spot, go all the way to that spot. And then, if it starts to get light and you're in a spot and you're thinking like, man, we should be a little bit higher, like pick your shit up and go. Don't waste the time. You need to, you got to exert that effort. So that's kind of my thoughts on finding those spots.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I break glassing also down into 2 categories. It's like one category is going to be a place where I can see the most spots that I think might hold an animal. And then the other is a place where I can glass and I can move on the animal from there. Because like I talked about earlier, a lot of the places that I'm glassing are miles away. And those miles, I might not be able, even if it's 2 miles a day, I might not be able to make it there today because it's not just 2 miles. You don't just walk over there.
Yeah.
But for like spring bear, which we have coming up, people are going to continue to hear me talk about spring bear because I want more people to do it. It's just such an awesome hunt and it helps. But for spring bear, gosh, they are so on the move at that time that if you're glassing across canyon or across a river and it's not to a place that you can move on and then shoot, uh, you might be wasting your time. Because if you glass
Yeah.
something up that's, across a river canyon and you hike down there and hike up again, that bear's gone. He's somewhere else now. So your opportunity is lost. Now, you might have to make some sacrifices in how far you can see, but I'm going to pick places for spring bear season in particular that if I glass a bear, I can move on him and I can go in there and get a shot on him because I don't have time on my side. It's not like a bull elk at the end of November where if I find him there, I can come back next week and I can find him there again.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, the way you describe that, James, because it's to me, it's very similar to the skill set I was kind of attempting to describe with Joe when you asked me that question. It's like hunt management, right? It's like if it's the last morning of your hunt, don't go glass from somewhere where you're not going to kill anything. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Or,
totally.
it like another concrete example is if you're sheep hunting in Colorado, right? You drew a sheep tag and there's 5 ram tags in that unit and there's 3 bands of rams. Don't go get somewhere where you can see all 3 bands of rams because those other 4 guys are going to shoot them in front of you while you're 2,500 yards away looking at them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
you need to shoot. You need to roll the dice and be in a spot where you can see them and make a move. Like I think, I mean, you nailed it there with your description in the context of glassing. Like that whole hunt management thing, that's you can get better at that. And I know it sounds really obvious probably to your listeners, but it amazes me, how people they'll kind of get themselves into a spot and then they'll be like, yeah, I mean, I don't know why I did that. I could have been over there. And it's like, well, you just did that because you didn't think about it before you did it. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Not that I always make perfect decisions, but if you think about it, a lot of times you can improve your odds.
Totally. Totally. And gosh, if you want to talk about time management and hunting, the best example of that out there is spearfishing, which you're getting into. I'm taking off here in a couple hours to go to Mexico and I'm going to do a little
Oh,
spearfishing.
cool.
It's the thing that I love the most that I'm the worst at. And
Yeah.
I don't do well when hunting season is only, 60 seconds long. And that's exactly what it is, man.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I was spearfishing in Hawaii 2 years ago, and then a tourist got smoked by a tiger shark not very far away from where I was. And I just saw the helicopters up like day in and day out that searching, didn't know what was
Yeah.
going on. And Hawaii is really good about not talking about when tourists get eaten by sharks because they need
Oh, yeah.
tourists to
Just
keep
from a
to,
PR
yeah.
perspective. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't hear about it very often.
Yeah.
But I called a buddy of mine who was on the fire department and he's like, yeah, tiger sharks are a pain. Just don't dress like a sea turtle and you'll be fine. And I was out here in this green Cryptek and brother, I looked exactly like a sea turtle, dude, shape and everything. So
with a stringer of bleeding fish on your
right.
waist.
Yeah. I was
Right.
asking for it. Well,
Yeah.
just a couple weeks ago, another tourist got eaten exactly where I was spearfishing, like 50 yards offshore by a tiger shark there. So hopefully we're not going to run into a bunch of tigers in the Caribbean where I'll be in Mexico. But yeah,
Cool,
I'm still looking forward to it. I think spearfishing is just the best. I mean, and I'm glad to hear that you're getting into it too. What kind of fish are you going after down there?
Yeah, man. So most of what, like I said, like I'm an amateur, man. In where I'm at down here, you can do like little shore dives.
Yeah.
So just like snapper, grouper, those sort of things. There's a lot of guys that do the pelagic species. I don't know, but I just haven't got into that yet. You know what I mean, James? I kind of want to concentrate like in terms of gear and all of that. I just want to have like I got all my shore diving stuff so I can focus on that now. And for me, it's I kind of break up, mountain hunting like this too. Like there's 2 components of it, right? There's like the hunting part of it and understanding the species, the glassing stuff we talked about, all of that. And then there's like a comfort level with being in the environment, right? And I would say like in the world of like the ocean and spearfishing and stuff, like that's my primary focus, like being like just a better water guy. And it's really, I think we may share this, man. The ocean is a challenge for me. I have enough experience in it. I shouldn't be telling you that I'm an amateur, but I am. You know what I mean? And it's because like for me, it's just been very hard for me to get up the learning curve and be very comfortable in the environment part of it. So that's like the part that I want to be, the breath hold stuff and just comfort in the ocean, all that. Like that's where I'm trying to like get that optimized.
Yeah, I'm much the same. I'm very much a tourist anytime I'm in the ocean. Like I'm not from there. I don't know how everything works. I don't know all the species and how they interact. And I'm not saying that I really know that anywhere, but I know a lot more of it in the mountains and canyons of my home area that I hunt in. And then, I learn that everywhere I go. And these little trips that I get to take, for a week long here, a week long there, every year or every other year to go mess around in the salt and go spearfishing is wonderful for me because it is such a frontier in my own imagination and experience. Like it's just this wild, uncontrolled place where anything is possible, and I don't know what's going on, and I'm learning something and experiencing something new all the time. I love it. I can't get enough of it. And I want to get better. So on this trip, I'm actually going to get guided on a couple of days. I've never been guided spearfishing before. And I'm so stoked, man. I hope the dude speaks English because I'm going to have a cajillion questions and really look forward to both increasing my personal safety as well as my effectiveness in doing it. But those shore dives, the reef fishing, that's my bread and butter. I love that. It's exciting. It's kind of non-threatening, and it's just a good time. And these fish are tremendous to eat. I mean, if you're going out and fishing for grouper and snapper, it doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah. No, from an eating perspective, for sure. I think a lot of like the hardcore spear fishermen, they kind of, they're easier fish to kill or whatever, but whatever.
Dude, I'm all about that.
Yeah, exactly.
You mean the one that tastes really good is easy to get? Sweet.
Yeah. No complaints for sure. No, I hear you. But man, James, you nailed it, dude. Like calling it a frontier, because that's the same reason I like it, man. And I think that's the same reason people like going west and going elk hunting or deer hunting or whatever. And I think about it a lot, man. I want to hear your opinion about it. I think there's less and less activities in this world that fulfill that, man. Because like it's something about like humankind, like in our our economic system or our social systems or whatever, like we want to control all the variables. You know what I mean? And we're pretty good at it, in a lot of avenues of life, how we get food, all this stuff, right? It's pretty controlled. And so there's actually not that many places where we can like go into an uncontrolled environment. Like there's just, anything can happen. And for better or worse, dude, that's appealing to a lot of us. I personally think it's probably appealing to all of us. Just some of us, haven't quite like, taken the leap to get exposed to it. But that's you like hit it's a frontier. I'm gonna steal that one from you, man, because I think that's a great way to put it.
Cool. What's coming up for you this year that you're excited about?
That's a good New Year's question, man. So we talked about the whole ocean thing, which for me, like the next couple of months, James is gonna be on the block. And then in addition to just keeping turning out a bunch of these YouTube videos that I have kind of stacked up,
which are so good, by the way. Like I said that on your show, man. But honestly, man, I use you as a reference and as a resource all the time. And I learn something from every single video that I've ever seen you do. You do such a good job. You're articulate. You don't overcomplicate things. And I think your biggest strength is sort of like what we've been talking about. When you look at Hillside, we break it down into the places that we need to spend more time looking, right? These are the zones we got to look at. And you're doing that with the type of information that you're putting out. You're not really messing around with the stuff that people don't need to know. You're putting out the stuff that people really do need to know, whether they're currently aware of that or not. And you're doing it in a succinct and powerful way that is very easy for me to understand. And I feel like other people are going to have the same experience, and you're just doing such a great job. And I want to encourage you to keep doing it. And I really want to encourage other people to get this information because it is so good.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And that's kind of like beyond the next couple months. Like right now I'm putting together kind of a hunt schedule, and I'll probably, my guiding was really limited this last year. It was like, it was my first season after selling my business. So it was like fairly limited. I had kind of a bunch of other stuff on my plate that I wanted to do, but I think I'll probably get back to a little bit of guiding, and I'm going to try to continue with a lot of the kind of how to kind of informational YouTube. That I think that's going to be like my bread and butter still. But this next fall, and I'm going to do some spring stuff too. I'm going to really make it a season of gathering as much content as possible. I guess this is a recommendation for, any guides out there, hunters out there, anybody, like, try to document it as much as possible. I know it's really annoying. Like, it's annoying to have a GoPro. It's annoying to, get your iPhone out all the time. And I'm not saying for social media and stuff, that's whatever somebody wants to do, but reflecting on the last, decade of my life, James, like, one of my regrets is I didn't get enough content. You know what I mean? Like just, all the strings of pack horses and, in the deep snow and the ice and all that. Like I have shaky iPhone videos and stuff, but like, I wish I had a GoPro for the last 5 years and would have taped all that stuff. So I'm going to try to get a bunch of that. And while doing that, use it to augment just a lot of this how-to stuff that's going to help people. And then I don't think I'm ever going to do a bunch of really in-depth, like long form, hunting, like hunting shows. I'm not sure that's kind of me, I guess. But I think I'll probably do a lot more of this how-to educational stuff, like in the field. So that's my plan for this year, man.
That's awesome. How can I support you in that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is probably the biggest way, man. You always speak so positive. You make me blush, man. Like when I'm interviewing you, you make me blush about the channel, and you just did now. So that's awesome, man.
Okay. Well, if you want to come up to my neck of the woods, be happy to show you around. There's some cool country here, and
yeah, that'd be cool.
You might find that some of this is a new frontier for you.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure it is, man.
Yeah.
I'll hit you up and take you up on that. Every 5 minutes, James, is this thing about the binoculars, the image stabilizing binoculars keeps popping in the back of my goofy brain. So you got that bug in my mind too.
Okay. Well, if I see you in Utah in February, I'll show you a pair.
That sounds good.
All right, man. Well, thank you again for your time. And where can people find you besides all the links that we're going to put in the podcast description?
Yeah, man. So my Instagram is Cliff Gry, CLIFF GRY. And then on YouTube, if you just go to the search bar and type in my name, Cliff Gray, it'll pop up. Those are their two main ways. People can go to my website, which is pursuitwithcliff.com. I've got a newsletter there. You can sign up there and keep in touch that way.
Awesome. Encourage folks to do that very much. Or not, if you don't want to learn, that's on you. If you like improving yourself, this is a good way to do it. Works for me. And again, sir, please keep doing it because I'm learning a lot and enjoying it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks, James.
Thank you. About a decade ago, I launched my old aluminum drift bow onto a remote whitewater river and floated for a couple sunny spring days to meet some friends who were bear hunting downstream. While I made them dinner that evening, one of my buddies came over and showed me a SIG rangefinder. I'd heard of the company and I'd seen their gear while I was a Marine,
but this was the first time I'd seen one of their products built for hunters. The range popped up instantly, and it continued to range everything I put the reticle on as I scanned across the canyon. I'd never seen anything like it on the civilian market, and frankly, not on the military one either. Since that day, SIG has come out with a long list of high quality and innovative products for hunters, as well as continuing the same for military, law enforcement, and responsible citizens. They have some great training facilities located around the country too. Check out all that SIG has to offer on their website, sigsauer.com. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by SIG. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast or me at Six Ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.